So what was it? 138. Good times. So what does cube root mean?
Or 1/3 power.
To the 1/3 power, correct. So you can break this away. You can break this a few different ways. You could say it's the cube root of 54 times the cube root of z to the 9th times the cube root of t to the 8th. But what does cube root mean? It means to the 1/3 power. To the 1/3 power. So that helps to think about right here because you have z to the 9th to the what? To the 1/3. And then you have t to the 8th to the 1/3. So if you keep on going with this, that's going to be z to the 3rd. And then times t to the what? 8/3. That's one way to do it. Now you have to actually work on this. So what should you do with 54? What are you looking for as a factor of 54? A perfect what? A perfect cube. So that's actually 27 times what? Times 2. Oh, not 3. Times 2. So this is the same thing as writing the cube root of 27 times the cube root of 2. What is the cube root of 27? 3 times the cube root of 2. So I would accept as a final most simplified answer, you could write it as 3 times the cube root of 2 times z cubed times t to 8/3. I would accept this. That would be fine. That would be fine.
Do you have to put...
Okay, so we need to simplify. Can we just subtract them right now? We can't because it's not the same thing under the cube root, right? But how can we simplify this thing over? We can break this into the product of two things. What can we break it into the product of? Cube root of and the cube root of y squared. What's the cube root of x to the 3rd? It's just x. So that's 8x times the cube root of y squared minus 2x times the cube root of. So we.
I don't understand what just happened. Sorry, I just don't want to move on into
That's fine. What is the cube root of x cubed? X. That's all we did. It's the only thing we did.
Okay.
So now we have, hold on. So it was nice of you to pause, but let's just stop. So we have 8x of them and we have 2x of them. So how many of them do we have? 6x of them. So we have 6x times what? Done. There it is. Does the negative power have anything to do with the sign of the answer? Does a negative power have anything to do with the sign of an answer? No, it has nothing to do. All this turns it into is you use an equal sign and go 1 over negative 64 to the 4/3. So yes, you could do raising it to the 4th and then cube rooting, but that's really hard because do you ever want to do 64th to the 4th power? No. So instead, what do? You do 1 over the cube root of negative 64 all raised to the, what is the cube root of negative 64? So it's negative 4 to the 4th, so that's going to be positive 1 over 256. It was great. Y'all got that. It was fantastic. Moving on to this one, a great first step I saw some people do was they moved some things around. So they brought up 3 to the 8/5, kept the y to the 2/5, and put it over x to the 1/4, x to the 7/4, and y to the 1/10. Well, you have the same base on top, and everything's being multiplied. So you have 3 and 3. So how many 3? You have 3 to the what power? 10 over 5.
So that'd be 6 squared.
Yep. And then you still have y to the 2/5 all over x to the what?
Squared.
Yep, x squared and y to the 1/10. So now you can always simplify. So it's 3 squared y to the 2/5 over x squared y to the 1/10. So what do you do with the y's? What do you do with the powers here? What do you do with them?
Subtract.
You subtract, exactly. So that's going to be 9 over, you have x squared still, right?
Yeah.
So then you have y to the 2/5 minus what? No, minus, I'm just doing y to the, I'm doing the subtraction. So to subtract, you need a common what? Denominator. So that is 4/10, correct?
Yeah.
So what does that turn into? 9 times y to the 3/10 all over what? So you could leave it right like that if you wanted to. That would be fine. You could leave it right like that. That's great. That is fantastic. So yeah, you guys were almost there. You just needed to do the subtraction.
That's what I was asking. I was like, what do we multiply by?
You don't multiply, you subtract. Exactly.
No, I meant the exponents to get to it to be denominator of 10.
2. You 2 over 2.
Yeah.
When in
Yep.
doubt, isolate x. Basically.
When in doubt, what? That's an exponent form. You could write it as 9 times the 10th root of y to the third all over if you wanted to. Okay. So back to the board, everybody. And I have 2 things that I would like you to simplify. What do you multiply this one by? What do you multiply it by?
Root 7 root minus.
Yes, it's a form of 1, right? And what's the important thing? That it's a minus sign. Yeah, you got rid of those radicals. You don't want radicals in the denominator. So I'm not going to do it. But then what do you multiply the bottom one by? 6.
No.
Oh, sorry.
1 minus I.
1 minus plus I
That's what I
over 1. And then you just need to make sure you cancel correctly and multiply correctly. The best thing you can do, put parentheses around all of this so you remember everything gets multiplied by everything. I'm not going to do them. These look pretty good at what I've seen so far. So times what? I squared. What's I squared times I squared? That's just going to be 1. What happens at this point? It repeats. So what's I to the 5th going to be? I. What's I to the, not squared, I to the 6th going to be? Negative 1. And then I to the 7th will be? Negative I. And then I to the 8th will be? 1. Does this keep on repeating?
Yes.
It keeps on repeating. So what I could ask you is, I could theoretically ask you, what is I to the 122nd power? How do you figure what I to the 122nd power is?
Divide by 4.
Divide by 4. So let's divide by 4. 4 into 122 is going to be 3, 12, 2, 0, I mean. What's the remainder?
No, it's like 4 radical 122.
Yeah, I understand. That's why you got to be careful. So 3, 12, 0, bring down the 2. So the remainder is 2. The remainder is 2. So which is it going to be? There's only 4 possible answers. Which one is it going to be?
Negative 1.
Right there. Exactly. This would be remainder, what would this be? Remainder 1, this would be remainder 2, remainder 3, and remainder 4, which is remainder 0 if you're dividing by 4.
And it wouldn't be.
What is the remainder when you divide 4 into here?
2.
2. You go around a whole bunch of times, right? Goes around a whole bunch of times, but then it goes only 2 more. Every time you go 4, it goes back to the beginning, right? It goes by 4, goes back to the beginning, goes by 4, goes back to the beginning. What's the remainder? 2. So it's the second one.
Gotcha.
If it's the remainder 3, it's the third one. But remainder 4 mean if you're dividing by 4 and the remainder is 4, what's the remainder? 0. The remainder is 0. Goes back, so therefore it's going to be. So if this was 120, what's the remainder?
1.
What?
Oh.
There you
0.
go. 0 because 4
So then
doesn't. It would
The
be
answer would be 1.
exactly. I understand. I understand what
So
you
you
meant.
divide whatever number.
By 4, do they generally look like? They look like this. The half, exactly. They start and they go up. But what about odd roots?
Down.
Nope. Well, close. So that's cube root of x or 6th root of x. What does it look like? Looks like an S, exactly. So that's, you need to know the shape.
You just need to know the
So
shape. You don't
if
need
it's
to
just, if there's no other information, if it's just like the square root of x, it'll always start at 0, 0.
Why is 6?
Yeah, odd 6 is an odd.
It's not an odd number. I'm sorry.
Like, does that change?
So if they're not being moved, it's 0, 0. Exactly. That's where 0, 0 would be. That's what you really need to know at all. That's really just what you need to know about the shape. If you're ever in doubt, you don't know how to graph it, what can you always make?
A chart.
Again.
Table.
And you
Table.
get a table.
You can always make a table.
Square root of the table.
So what does that mean?
The table is a table.
That's a different table, but yes, that's correct. That you're correct. That's another place table comes up. But in this case, you can always plot points. So if I ask you to graph something and you have no idea how to do like the clever way or the straightforward way, plot like 4 or 5 points, like, oh, it's an S. Boom, done.
Okay.
Gabby, plug in for X.
9. 8.
No. 8 is a good number. 27 is a good number.
2.
64 is a good number. Why? Because what's the cube root?
8 equals 2.
I understand. Many of you are talking. I'm trying to respond, but it's hard. What's the cube root of 8?
2.
2. What's the cube root of 27? 3. That's why these are good numbers to plug in. Should you plug in like 18? No. So choose nice numbers. I'm not going to ask you really hard graphing questions. The biggest thing, again, is that you need to know the general shape. And if you get lost, plot some points. None of the graphing questions should take you more than 60 seconds.
Okay.
So 5 squared plus
5 squared.
equals
2 squared.
25 plus 144 is equal to c squared. 169 is equal to c squared. C is 13. Done.
Okay, so then we got the.
So on this one, on the one up above, it's asking you to find the distance between these 2 points. How do you find the distance between 2 points? What do you do with the x values?
Subtract them.
So root 2 minus negative 2 root 2. And what do you do with that subtraction?
We're going to
You square it. And then what do you add to it?
number 2 on the one that we got.
The same thing for the,
Yeah.
so it's going to be root 6 minus 4 root 6. And what do you do?
Yeah, I don't.
Square it. And then what do you do with that whole sum?
C squared.
Yeah, so what do you do if you want the distance? The square root. So you subtract the x values, square them, add that to the subtraction of the y values and square it. Now, the reason they give you these values is because, is this kind of like what we were just working on? Like, would you have to carefully multiply that? Yeah, absolutely. So between any 2 points, what do you subtract? What are the x values? A minus c, and what do you do? Square it, and then what do you add? And then what do you do? And then what do you do with the whole thing? Equals c squared, but you square it.
Square it
Because it's, remember, it's the two sides squared. Like on this one, what did we do with 5? We squared it. What did we do with 12? And then we had that squared. So what did we have to do to go from here to here? Square root. So yes, this right here, Noah, another way to say it, this is equal to the distance what?
from a
Distance squared. So if you want to just get the distance, what do?
It's not times two.
you do a minus c and b minus
No, if this is distance squared and you want to isolate distance, what do you do to both sides?
square root.
Exactly. So distance is equal to the square root of a minus c squared plus. So for example, let's say I gave you this, 2 points, 2, 9, and 6, 4. How would you find the distance between them? 2 minus what?
Square.
Plus.
3x plus 6 minus 4 squared.
What do you do to that?
3 plus 4.
Yep. So what is that? It's going to be
Plus 2.
something squared plus something else squared. What is that?
I think the 7. Hold on.
What's 2 minus 6?
No, it's not. Negative 4.
And what's 9 minus 4?
No, this.
What's negative 4 squared?
Positive 16.
Plus.
25.
So that's going to be the square root of.
No, you're